There's a quiet frustration that many people never talk about. You do the inner work, you read the books, you reflect on your patterns and try to respond more consciously. And yet, your life keeps circling back to the same place. Different job, same pressure. Different relationship, same emotional dynamics. Different goals, same invisible resistance. It's not dramatic enough to call a crisis, but it's heavy enough to make you quietly wonder if something is wrong with you. Most people assume the answer is more effort, more discipline, more motivation, more belief. So they push harder. But over time, a pattern appears. The more you try to change your life, the more it feels like the same version of you is still running the show. This is the moment most people pause and start wondering what they've been missing. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your life keeps repeating, even though you've done the affirmations, the visualizations, and worked on yourself. And more importantly, you'll discover the one internal shift that actually allows reality to change. Not by trying harder, not by forcing belief, but by releasing the identity that keeps collapsing the same outcomes over and over again. What most people don't realize is that this repetition isn't happening at the level of thought. It's happening at the level of identity. Your old self isn't just a memory you can recall or a story you can rewrite. It's a living pattern stored in your nervous system. It's the emotional baseline your body returns to when you're not consciously trying to be different. The tone of your inner world before the day even begins. It's the version of you that wakes up already braced, already expecting, already familiar with how things usually go. This is why change feels so exhausting. Because even when your mind wants something new, your body is still loyal to what it knows. You can think new thoughts, but your nervous system keeps replaying the same signals. And those signals shape your choices long before logic steps in. How you speak, what you tolerate, what you avoid, what you unconsciously expect to fail. This isn't weakness, it's conditioning. At some point in your past, your system learned how to survive disappointment, rejection, uncertainty, or loss. It adapted. It built an identity that could stay alert, stay guarded, stay realistic. That identity kept you functional. It kept you safe. But over time, survival became familiarity, and familiarity quietly became me. So now, even when the outer circumstances change, the inner signal stays the same, and reality responds to that signal with perfect consistency. Not because you're cursed, not because you're doing something wrong, but because coherence always wins. Reality doesn't respond to what you want occasionally. It responds to what you consistently embody. That's why trying harder rarely works. You're asking a future that belongs to a different version of you to show up, while still being energetically identical to who you were yesterday. This is where most manifestation teachings stop short. They focus on desire. They focus on belief. They focus on effort. But they rarely talk about identity. And identity isn't changed by force. It's changed by awareness. Because the moment you start noticing your old self as a pattern, instead of calling it who I am, something subtle begins to shift. You create a little space between the observer and the identity, between awareness and reaction. And that space matters. It's the difference between unconsciously repeating the past and consciously interrupting it. This is why awareness is not passive. It's active. It's causal. When you become aware of the old emotional baseline without merging with it, you stop feeding it energy. You stop collapsing the same reality automatically. And for the first time, something else becomes possible. Not instantly dramatic, not explosively magical, but quietly different. This is also why the old self often resists change. Not because it wants to sabotage you, but because it was built to keep you safe. And safety to the nervous system means predictability, even if that predictability hurts. The old self says, "At least I know how this ends." The future self says, "You don't, and that's okay." And until that conversation happens inside you, the body will keep choosing the familiar over the unknown. So if you've ever felt like you understand what needs to change but can't quite live it, if you've ever felt like you're standing at the edge of something new but your system keeps pulling you back, that's not failure. That's identity inertia. And it's exactly where real change begins. Because once you see this clearly, the work stops being about fixing yourself. It becomes about releasing loyalty to an identity that no longer fits. To see how this actually plays out in real life, let me introduce you to someone. You'll see how identity lives in the nervous system, not in words. Why effort without embodiment creates resistance. And how shifting who you're being, not what you're chasing, is what actually allows reality to reorganize. Not someday, but from the inside out. Let me introduce you to Alex. Alex isn't dramatic, Alex isn't lost, and Alex definitely isn't lazy. On paper, Alex is doing fine. A stable career, a decent income, a life that looks reasonable from the outside. But beneath the surface, something feels off. Alex has changed jobs more than once, always hoping the next role would feel lighter. The titles were different, the teams were new. But after the initial excitement faded, the same pressure returned, the same tightness in the chest on Sunday nights, the same quiet thought, is this really it? Relationships followed a similar pattern. Different people, different beginnings, the same emotional dynamic. At first, there was connection, then distance, then the familiar moment where Alex felt unseen, overextended, quietly bracing for disappointment again. Alex didn't ignore these patterns. Alex tried to understand them. There were books on emotional intelligence, podcasts on healing, journals filled with reflections and intentions. Alex genuinely wanted to change, and believed change was possible. But no matter how much insight Alex gained, the lived experience didn't shift in the way it was supposed to. And that's when the realization arrived. Not as a breakthrough, but as a quiet, unsettling question. What if I'm not repeating situations, but repeating myself? That question changed everything, because Alex began to see something that had been invisible before. It wasn't the job, it wasn't the partner, it wasn't bad timing, it was the same internal posture showing up everywhere. A subtle self-protection, a readiness for things to go wrong, a habit of staying emotionally guarded, even while wanting more. That version of Alex wasn't wrong. It had formed during earlier disappointments, moments where being hopeful felt risky and expecting less felt safer. It was an identity shaped for survival. And that identity kept recreating familiar outcomes, not intentionally, but automatically. Alex finally understood the missing piece. Change wasn't failing because of a lack of effort or understanding. It was stalling because the same version of Alex kept entering every new situation. Different scenes, same internal signal. And until that signal changed, the external world would keep responding in the same way. This wasn't a reason to feel ashamed. It was a reason to stop blaming circumstances and start questioning identity. Because the moment Alex saw the pattern clearly, something softened. For the first time, change didn't feel like pushing uphill. It felt like releasing a grip that had been held for far too long. And that release didn't come from effort. It came from seeing clearly. What Alex was beginning to sense wasn't just emotional. It was biological. Long before conscious intention comes online, the body has already made a decision. The nervous system scans for familiarity. It asks one quiet question. Is this safe based on what I already know? And then it responds automatically. This is where science quietly confirms what many people feel but can't explain. By the time most adults reach their mid-30s, the majority of their daily thoughts, emotional reactions, and behaviors are not consciously chosen. They are rehearsed, memorized, wired through repetition. What feels like me is often just a set of learned responses running in the background. That's why insight alone doesn't change reality. You can understand your patterns intellectually and still live them physically. Because identity doesn't live in the thinking mind. It lives in the nervous system. When Alex walked into a meeting, the body subtly tightened before any words were spoken. When intimacy deepened, the chest constricted just enough to stay guarded. When opportunity appeared, excitement was immediately paired with caution. These weren't decisions. They were signals. Thoughts send electrical impulses through the brain. Emotions generate magnetic signals through the body. Together, they create a consistent broadcast, an energetic signature that says, "This is who I am being right now." And reality responds to that signal with precision. Not emotionally, not morally, but mechanically. In physics, coherence refers to systems that are aligned and stable. When different parts of a system move in harmony, the system becomes powerful and predictable. When they're fragmented, the system becomes noisy and inconsistent. Human beings are no different. When your thoughts say, "I want change," but your body is still braced for disappointment, incoherence is created. And incoherent systems don't generate new outcomes. They repeat familiar ones. This is why forcing positivity often backfires. You're asking the surface to override the signal underneath. Alex noticed this clearly for the first time. The problem wasn't lack of desire. It wasn't lack of belief. It was that the body was still loyal to a version of reality built around self-protection. And here's where science and consciousness meet. In quantum physics, reality doesn't exist as a single fixed outcome until observation takes place. Before that, it exists as a range of probabilities, possibilities, potentials. But observation isn't just looking. Observation includes the state of the observer. Who you are while observing determines what collapses into form. Not because consciousness controls reality, but because systems respond to stable, repeated signals. This doesn't mean your mind creates reality through wishful thinking. It means reality responds to coherence, to the consistency of the signal you embody. When Alex showed up as the guarded self, life mirrored caution. When Alex carried expectation of disappointment, situations found a way to fulfill it. Not because of fate, not because of punishment, but because the system was stable, and stability always reproduces itself. The most important realization came quietly. Change wasn't about becoming someone better. It was about releasing loyalty to someone outdated. The old identity had been shaped during moments when staying small felt safer than reaching, when hoping too much carried a cost. That identity wasn't wrong. It was functional, but it was no longer aligned. And misalignment is exhausting. This is why real transformation doesn't begin with effort. It begins with awareness, with noticing the signal you are broadcasting without trying to correct it. The moment Alex stopped trying to fix the old self and started observing it instead, something shifted. The body softened. The breath deepened. The nervous system received a new message. I am no longer in danger. That safety is critical, because only when the nervous system feels safe does it allow new patterns to emerge. Only then can coherence form between thought, emotion, and action. And only then does reality begin to reorganize. Not dramatically, not instantly, but reliably. This bridge between science and spirit is simple but precise. You don't attract what you want. You don't force what you believe. You resonate with what you consistently embody. And the moment embodiment changes, the field responds. Not because you asked louder, but because you finally tuned differently. Understanding this intellectually is helpful, but understanding alone doesn't change a life. Real change happens when insight moves out of the mind and into the body. This is the part most people skip, not because it's complicated, but because it's subtle. And subtle shifts don't feel dramatic at first. They feel quiet, almost ordinary. That's why they work. So instead of trying to become someone new, we're going to do something much simpler. We're going to stop feeding the version of you that no longer fits. Let's begin gently. First, bring awareness to the old self, not to judge it, but to recognize it. Notice the emotional baseline you return to when you're not trying, the tone of your inner world when nothing is happening, the posture your body naturally holds. You don't need to label it as good or bad, just notice it. This is important. You cannot release what you refuse to see, and you don't have to fight what you can observe. So give this version of you a simple name, not a dramatic one, just something that captures its energy. The guarded one, the over-prepared one, the one who expects less to avoid disappointment. This isn't about creating distance, it's about creating clarity. Now, instead of trying to push this identity away, acknowledge it. Silently thank it. It carried you through moments where staying open felt unsafe. It helped you function. It helped you endure. And because of that, it deserves respect, not control. When the nervous system feels respected, it relaxes. And relaxation is what allows change. Now imagine this identity not as something you are, but as something you've been carrying. Like a weight. Like a backpack filled with old expectations, learned reactions, and familiar stories. You don't have to open it. You don't have to analyze what's inside. Just notice the weight. And then, in your own time, imagine setting it down. Not throwing it away, not destroying it, just choosing to no longer carry it. As you do this, pay attention to your body. The breath naturally deepens, the shoulders soften, the jaw loosens. These are not imagined responses. They're signals that your nervous system is registering safety. Now comes the most important part. Instead of asking, "Who do I want to be?" ask, "How does the version of me who already feels aligned inhabit their body?" Notice the posture, the pace of breathing, the way attention rests instead of scans. This isn't performance, it's permission. Let yourself sit or stand as that version would, not perfectly, just honestly. Feel the difference between effort and embodiment. Effort feels tight. Embodiment feels grounded. Now anchor this shift with a declaration, not as a mantra to convince reality, but as a signal to your own system. Silently or softly say, "I no longer create from the past. I am tuning to who I truly am." Say it once, pause, then say it again, not louder, but slower. Let the words land in the body, not the mind. This declaration isn't magic, it's orientation. You're letting your nervous system know which signal to prioritize. From here, the work becomes practical. Throughout your day, notice moments where the old identity tries to return, not aggressively, but out of habit. A familiar reaction, a familiar tightening, a familiar expectation. When that happens, don't correct it. Don't shame it. Don't spiral into analysis. Simply pause. Breathe. Soften your posture. And remember, This is residue, not identity. Every time you choose presence over reaction, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. This is how embodiment works, not through force, through repetition. Small, consistent signals tell the nervous system what is real now. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, coherence forms. Thoughts align with emotions. Emotions align with behavior. Behavior aligns with opportunity. This is how reality begins to respond differently. Not because you asked for more, but because you became available for something new. And in the final part of this video, we're going to talk about what happens when this shift stabilizes, how the world starts meeting you differently, how synchronicities emerge naturally, and how to live from this new signal without slipping back into effort. Because this isn't a moment, it's a way of being. And once your system learns it, it doesn't forget. At some point, something subtle begins to change. Not all at once, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in small, unmistakable moments. You notice that your reactions are slower, that familiar tension doesn't grip you as tightly, that you pause where you used to brace. And without forcing anything, life begins to meet you differently. People respond with less friction. Conversations feel clearer. Decisions feel less urgent and more aligned. This is what it feels like when a new signal starts to stabilize. Not because you became someone else overnight, but because you stopped feeding the version of you that was built around self-protection. Here's something important to understand. The old self doesn't disappear forever. It will visit, not to sabotage you, but because it's familiar. It's learned. It's been rehearsed for years. When uncertainty arises, it may try to step back in and say, "Let me handle this the way I always have." When that happens, remember this. You don't need to fight it. You just need to recognize it. Because the moment you observe the old identity without merging with it, you're no longer inside it. You're standing as awareness. And awareness changes everything. This is what physicists mean when they talk about the observer effect, not in a mystical sense, but in a practical one. The state of the observer influences what becomes real. When you observe your life from presence instead of habit, new possibilities naturally emerge, not because you commanded them to, but because you became compatible with them. This is why real change feels quieter than expected. There's less striving, less urgency, less internal argument, and more trust. Trust doesn't mean you know exactly how things will unfold. It means your system no longer needs to control the outcome to feel safe. From this place, action becomes clean. Decisions feel grounded. Opportunities appear without forcing. And when things don't move immediately, you don't collapse back into doubt, because your identity is no longer built on constant proof. This is the real shift. You're no longer asking reality to change for you. You're meeting reality as someone different. And reality responds, not out of generosity, but out of coherence. So here's the invitation, and it's simple. Before the world rushes in tomorrow morning, pause. Ask yourself, which version of me is showing up today? Not to judge, just to choose. That single moment of choice, repeated, is how timelines change. Not because of one big decision, but because of consistent orientation. If this video resonated with you, not emotionally, but somatically, if something in your body softened as you listened, then you're already experiencing the shift. And if you feel called to mark that moment, leave a comment with this phrase: I am no longer creating from my past. Not as a ritual, not as a trend, but as a conscious signal to yourself. And if you want to continue exploring this way of living, grounded, embodied, and coherent, you're welcome to stay connected. Not for information, but for integration. Because the real work doesn't happen while watching videos. It happens in the quiet moments when you choose presence over pattern. And every time you do, the field responds. Not loudly, not instantly, but reliably. You were never stuck because your future wasn't possible. You were stuck because the same identity kept collapsing the same reality. Now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And that awareness, that's where everything begins to change.